In the scorching July of 1706, the red soil of the Kingdom of Congo in West Africa was parched and cracked under the blazing sun, and the air hung thick with oppressive dryness. Before a rough makeshift gallows and a towering pile of firewood, tens of thousands of African common people knelt spontaneously in the dust. There were no angry shouts among them, only endless sorrow and desperate sobs. All eyes were fixed on a 22-year-old girl bound tightly with heavy iron chains. She had a delicate yet haggard face, bare feet, and wore nothing but a coarse gray linen robe. In her arms, she held a crying newborn baby closely. This young woman, who was about to be sent to the stake by Catholic missionaries and her own king, was Kimpa Vita, the most legendary and heartbreaking African Joan of Arc in the history of the Kingdom of Congo. Tonight, let the flickering firelight stay with us, as we follow this story and learn about her life. In European nautical logs and confidential church letters, Kimpa Vita was depicted as an evil witch who deluded people with sorcery and a shameless liar who claimed holiness while giving birth to an illegitimate child. Yet for the refugees of Congo, who were displaced and at risk of being sold as goods across the Atlantic at any moment, this girl who claimed to be possessed by Saint Anthony was the only glimmer of divinity they could grasp in this era of betrayal. Her life was extremely short, yet like a shooting star streaking across the pitch-black night sky, she tried to piece together the shattered ancient empire with visions, divine revelations and an almost frantic tenderness. When raging flames finally rose that summer night, scorching smoke engulfed her and her child, marking the collapse of one possibility for the self-salvation of this West African land. Now let the hustle and bustle of the day drift away. Close your eyes, and follow the gentle narration to delve into Kimpa Vita's story, woven with mysticism, the blood and tears of war, and the beauty of fate. To understand why Kimpa Vita ended up at the stake, we need to turn back the clock and look at the era of despair and division into which she was born. Though nominally a great Christian African empire with a 200-year history, the Kingdom of Congo had long been stripped of its last shred of dignity by European slave ships sailing across the Atlantic. Portuguese colonizers brought flintlock muskets and crosses, along with insatiable greed for African people. Royal generals waged civil wars frantically for the throne, selling their defeated kinsmen to white traders in exchange for luxury goods. The ancient capital of Sao Salvador had fallen into ruins, with wild dogs wandering among the collapsed churches and palace remains. Kimpa Vita was born into a noble aristocratic family. From an early age, she had a pair of profound eyes that seemed to see through people's hearts. With a refined look, she possessed a calm and detachment beyond her years. In Congo at that time, there were traditional mediums known as Ngagamra, who were believed to cross the boundary between life and death to comfort the souls of ancestors who had died unjustly. The young Kimpa Vita soon proved to be exceptionally gifted in this spiritual practice. She would often sit alone on huge boulders at the edge of the jungle, listening to the distant gunshots of civil wars and watching her fellow countrymen chained together and driven toward the coastline amid cries and wails. A lingering, unbearable agony welled up deep inside her. Tormented by the powerlessness to change reality, caught between Catholic theology and indigenous witchcraft, her mind underwent an earth-shaking transformation. Late one night in 1704, the 20-year-old Kimpa Vita suddenly came down with a strange and fatal fever. She lay on a straw mat, refusing food and water for days on end, her breath so faint that she seemed already dead. On that Friday night, when her family prepared to dress her in funeral garments, she suddenly opened her eyes wide after a soft spasm. Her gaze turned extraordinarily bright, and her voice lost the shyness of a young girl, carrying an awe-inspiring majesty that made people want to kneel before her. To her terrified clansmen, she announced that the noble maiden named Kimpa Vita was gone forever. What stood before them now was Saint Anthony resurrected in her flesh. Unable to bear the sufferings of the Congolese people any longer, the saint would use her voice to rebuild this cursed kingdom. After recovering from the severe illness, Kimpa Vita seemed like a changed person. She abandoned all the comforts of noble life and began walking barefoot across the thorny, red-soiled land of Congo. Her voice held an indescribable magnetism and soothing power. When she preached in the village markets in a low, unhurried tone, war-weary refugees around her would gradually calm down, as if brushed by a cool night breeze. She began to promote what European missionaries deemed heretical Anthonyism. She proclaimed that Jesus, the Virgin Mary and all saints were actually black people born on the sacred land of Congo. The Roman curia and white priests, she argued, were merely political tools used by slave traders to deceive Africans. Raw and impassioned as this doctrine was, it sent a spiritual shockwave through the black commoners who had long lived under cultural inferiority and the shadow of death. For the first time, they came to realize that their dark skin was pure and flawless in the eyes of the divine. Beyond preaching, Kimpa Vita accomplished a feat that even the warlords who ruled divided regions and commanded mighty armies dared not attempt. She resolved to lead her people back to Sao Salvador and restore the ruined capital. Fearless of wild beasts in the dense woods and roaming bandits, she held high a simple wooden cross and marched step by step toward the ancient holy city, which had lain abandoned for 30 years, overgrown with weeds and bushes. Upon hearing the saint's call, tens of thousands of displaced farmers, women and even deserters tired of bloodshed picked up their provisions and farm tools, and followed her silently, forming a quiet procession stretching for miles. When they finally stood upon the crumbling city walls of Sao Salvador, Kimpa Vita knelt in the dirt. With her hands worn raw and bleeding, she started clearing rubble from the ruined cathedral. Moved to tears, the refugees then summoned incredible strength to build houses and reclaim wasteland. In just a few months, the once dead city miraculously came back to life under Kimpa Vita's inspiration and visions, once again becoming the spiritual heart of the entire kingdom of Kongo. She dwelt in a simple thatched hut, blessing newborn babies and wiping sweat from the dying elders. Amid this blood-stained era, she carved out a fleeting, gentle paradise with her own hands. Yet in this cruel world built upon power, firearms and gold, purity and kindness were often the gravest crimes that invited destruction. Kimpa Vita's growing influence in Sao Salvador was like a sharp blade, striking fear deep into the vested interests who grew rich from civil wars and the slave trade. King Pedro IV of Congo hid in the northern hills, locked in fierce conflicts with neighboring realms with covert support from the Portuguese. When he learned that a girl in her 20s had reclaimed the capital and won the hearts of the whole nation without raising a single soldier, overwhelming jealousy and dread consumed him. To Pedro IV, Kimpa Vita was no longer a saint delivering divine revelations, but a political rebel who might topple his throne at any moment, a great threat that had to be eliminated without delay. Meanwhile, the Portuguese Franciscan missionaries who had long dominated the spiritual realm of Congo also harbored bitter hatred for her. Her claims of a black Christ shattered the chains of spiritual enslavement forged by the colonizers. If her teaching spread, the religious legitimacy of Europeans along the West African coast would vanish completely, and the slave trade would no longer thrive. Thus, a dirty conspiracy woven by the indigenous king, European colonizers, and cold-hearted clergymen quietly closed in the shadows. The missionaries pressured the king in private, even invoking the authority of the Vatican to intimidate Pedro IV.